community ecology. Community ecology is the interaction amongst Community ecology is the interaction amongst species. Interactions are known as symbiosis. Some of the relationships we have in symbiosis is competition. Competition can happen within a species. So competition for a mate or even food sources. Thus, whoever has the traits that allow them to get the resource, those traits will be passed on and allow that individual to reproduce. But then we can have competition between species types. And we have the competitive exclusion principle. The competitive exclusion principle is that two species competing for the same resource cannot coexist. So one species is going to win and take over, and the other species won't be able to survive in that particular area. The competitive exclusion principle can be seen in two different species of shellfish living in the intertidal zone. In a lot of areas. So if we are looking at the ocean and we have a rock, and then here's our ocean, we have some species of shellfish or mussels that can live at the top of the rock, and we have some that can live towards the bottom of the rock. But at some point, those two come to a meeting point. And whatever species, the dividing line is going to be based on the competitive exclusion principle. Whichever species can survive and reproduce at whatever level is going to determine whose niche extends to where. So you can't have an intermingling. So if the species on the bottom starts coming up here, there's going to be competition. One of them is going to survive and reproduce, the other one is not. So whoever gets to survive is going to keep that area. If the red one survives and reproduces, it will not allow the other one to live there, and it's going to start to take over that niche. This can also lead to resource partitioning. This is where two species divide a resource based on behavior, how they use it, or based on morphology, basically how they access it through the way that they are built. We have predation as another symbiotic relationship. You have a predator and prey, so the predator is going to go out and eat the prey. Falling within predation or predators is a parasitoid, so it's kind of like a parasite, but a parasitoid is essentially an organism that lays its eggs in another species. There are many funguses that do this. There's many insects that do this, where they lay their eggs in a different organism. That's called a parasitoid, which is a form of predation. Another symbiotic relationship are parasites. Parasites are organisms that live and feed off another host. So a tick is going to be living on a mammal of some sort. It could be you, it could be a dog, it could be a deer. Oftentimes, parasites carry diseases. Many ticks carry different diseases. There's an encephalitis. There is Lyme's disease. There is the, I think it's the Lone Star disease, where if you get bit, you are no longer, you become allergic to meat products. So the disease could be a virus, it could be a bacteria, it could be a fungus, or it could be a protist. So there's many different diseases that parasites can pass on. We have herbivory. Essentially, herbivores are going to be eating plants. Plants do have defenses for themselves to help keep them going, even if they get eaten. When a herbivore eats certain plants, they'll eat the top of the plant off, which triggers some side buds to start growing. So when that top bud is gone, it forces these side buds to activate to allow more growth to happen. Some plants produce toxins Some have prickly spines. So there's a lot of different ways that plants do try to protect themselves from herbivores. And lastly, we have mutualism and commensalism. Commensalism is where one species benefits and the other species doesn't really care that the other species is there. Oftentimes these are species that live together, and one gets its diet from the other, and the other one doesn't really lose or gain anything from its that other species' presence. Mutualism is when there's both benefits. So like bees and flowers, bees get the nectar and pollen they need to make in order to keep their hive fed and growing, but then also they pick up pollen and they go to another flower, so it pollinates the flowers for the plant. And now I want to talk about some important species that can be found within a community that are integral to that community. So we have a keystone species. The keystone species is a species that plays a very important role in the maintenance of the ecosystem, but it might not be clear, it might not be obvious because of the relative abundance of that species. It's called a keystone species because when you look at if you look at a stone arch, the stone here at the top is called the keystone. That is the one brick that's holding all of these others into the arch shape. And without this, all the rest will fall down. So without this species, all the rest of the species will essentially fall down. The ecosystem won't be able to survive without the keystone species. Many keystone species are ecosystem engineers. Ecosystem engineers are species that build habitats for other organisms without meaning to do so. An example of this is the beaver. A beaver is a keystone species to an ecosystem. They, with all of the taking down of the wood, it creates, and creating the dams, it creates many different habitats for a lot of different species, including the old stumps. The stump that essentially is going to die because it doesn't have the tree anymore. That stump is going to be a place for insects and worms and that sort of thing to live, and fungus to also live and feed on. The dams that they build create little habitats for some of the aquatic organisms that are living there, so they're quite important. Stingrays or skates that are in the ocean also are ecosystem engineers and keystone species. With the flapping of their little wings, they create different puddles and that sort of thing within the sand floor, creating different habitats for different organisms. And then we have indicator species. Indicator species are species that are used by ecologists to mark the health of an ecosystem. So we can look at the presence or the absence of a particular species to see how that ecosystem is doing. If we are looking for the absence of species, these are going to be essentially specialists. So if there are particular ecosystem specialists that were once living there that are no longer, that's probably meaning that some parameter is far outside the range of tolerance for that organism, and there is a big change in that ecosystem. When we're looking at the health of a stream, we can look for particular insect larvae in the stream to see if they are there or not. So in the stream, there are particular organisms that are very pollution tolerant, and then there are some that are very pollution intolerant. If you have a lot of species that are pollution intolerant found in the stream, you know that the health of the waterway is pretty decent. If you are seeing more of an abundance of the pollution tolerant organisms and less of the intolerant organisms, you know that you have some water quality issues. So these indicator species are species that ecologists can use to see how well the ecosystem is doing. And lastly, let's take a look at ecological succession. Succession is the predictable replacement of one organism. Succession is the replacement of one group of organisms by another group of organisms over time. So there are two types of succession. We have primary succession, which occurs on bare rock. So here we can think of glacial melt, volcanic eruption, where the lava magma solidifies and it's become solid rock. Over time, these areas are going to be re-inhabited by different organisms. And generally with primary, the first organisms in are generally a fungus or a lichen. And lichen is a symbiotic relationship between a fungus and an algae. And the fungus and the lichen digest by secreting digestive enzymes, and that the digestive enzyme breaks down the rock, creating smaller rock and smaller rock and smaller rock, which eventually will become soil. And then certain seeds can come in and take root in that little bit of soil. And then you have other things coming along. So the first species in that area is called the pioneer species. So the pioneer species is the first species to start inhabiting an area after succession. So a pioneer species is the first species to start inhabiting an area either in primary succession or in secondary succession. So what is secondary succession? Secondary succession is succession that happens on an area that is disturbed and it still has soil. So if you think of an area that we as humans may have come in and inhabited, let's say we put up a building and then we leave and we don't inhabit that building anymore. Certain plants will start to grow in the cracks of the concrete, and then the cracks become a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger organisms can start to come in. And over time, that area starts to regrow. In New England, in the United States, if you're walking through the woods, oftentimes you're going to stumble across a rock wall and you're going to wonder, why would somebody come into the middle of a forest to build a rock wall? Well, they didn't. What they did is they took down all the trees, put up the rock walls to determine property boundaries, and there was less of a need for agriculture land. A lot of those disturbed areas, farm areas, were left to just regrow, and now they are the forests of New England. So if you are walking through, you'll find the stone wall that was put there when the area was not inhabited by all these trees. So over time, the trees have grown in and has created the forested areas. So much of New England is actually new growth forest and not old growth forest, because it was in the colonial times, most of the forests were taken down so they could have agricultural land. Succession can also happen in aquatic areas. So if we have, let's say, a pond area, and over time, sediments and debris is going to start piling up on the bottom of the pond area. And this can continue happening. And after thousands of years, eventually this area can be filled in and is no longer an aquatic area because of the amount of sediment that has built up over time. So that is a community ecology. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.